Well, this began the double main event trend. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to another edition of the WrestleMania review series. This time we are at WrestleMania VIII, taking place in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I'm pretty positive that they will be coming back to this place, given that as a recording, it's 2025, and up to this point, TKO has made a deal with Indianapolis, having three of their big pay-per-views, that being the Royal Rumble, SummerSlam, which will be next year, and I'm pretty positive WrestleMania 43 will take place here. Granted, it won't be in this exact same arena. I believe this dome has been removed. I'm not positive on that, but Lucas Oil has basically been a big selling point, and this crowd was definitely pretty good. A lot of people sleep on the Indianapolis crowds, but they are actually pretty good, so I can't really fault them on that. And I thought that this was a pretty enjoyable first half of the show. This show was kind of a clunkered mess. If you guys know, this was around the time about the steroid trials and whether or not Hulk Hogan was going to stick around. So it wouldn't make sense for having him at the top star. Granted, Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan, the reason why they pivot out of that match because it wasn't selling at house shows, so they just completely pivoted out of there, and then they ended up switching it to Ric Flair and Savage, making Sid and Hogan the main event, and that was another thing. Double main events were not working. It never worked, but this was the birth of the whole let's do double main events, everybody. We have two main events this year. No, it's always whatever goes last. But the crowd was good. The first half of the show was good. The rest was passable, I guess. I don't know what to say about it, but with that, let's just begin. We kick off the show with Rebel McIntyre singing America the Beautiful. Solid performance. I thought this was good. We kick off the show with Tito Santana versus Shawn Michaels. This was when Shawn Michaels has turned on Marty Jannetty, the Rockers no more, and Shawn Michaels went on to do his big things, and this was his first ever singles match at a WrestleMania, alongside Sensational Sherry, who last year was with Macho Man. So Sensational Sherry is a great manager. You could tell that like her personality as a heel was just top notch, and her being with Shawn Michaels, that was a good twist, and I really enjoyed it. And I can't really fault it. This was a good match for Shawn Michaels' first singles match at WrestleMania. I really enjoyed it for the most part. It wasn't the greatest match, but it was a good match to get people hyped and excited for what Shawn Michaels eventually brings to the table in WrestleMania. Undertaker versus Jake Roberts. Now, like I mentioned earlier, they had to pivot from Ric Flair and Hogan. They switched it to Savage and Ric Flair. And then because of it, Randy Savage and Jake Roberts never got to get their payoff, which is unfortunate. So they put Hogan and Sid, who Sid was supposed to face The Undertaker in this WrestleMania from what I hear. So then that left Undertaker and Jake Roberts doing nothing. They just put them together, and they actually pulled off a decent match. I like the tombstone to the outside. I believe Undertaker's the first man to ever kicked out of Jake Roberts' DDT. That is how you sell moves. Like I've been mentioning throughout these WrestleManias how Jake Roberts' DDT was awesome, and this was a big proof of that. And Undertaker gets the win, making him 2-0. A solid little match and kind of a mini dream match of mine. But yeah, good. Another dream match of mine was possibly my match of the night. It wasn't necessarily, a lot of people would say Savage Flair, but this to me was the match of the night. Roddy Piper versus Bret the Hitman Hart for the Intercontinental Championship. Now, the story going around was that Bret Hart was a great Intercontinental Champion. He lost it to the Mountie. Roddy Piper gained it back in less than a day at the Royal Rumble. And then they wanted to put Bret Hart and Piper in here. And basically, the whole job was to get Bret the Hitman Hart over, give him a big victory at WrestleMania, and who better than to make that Roddy Piper WrestleMania headliner? And crazy enough, Roddy Piper has never won singles gold up to this point. He's only had this as his only singles title, at least in WWF, from what I know. And he did a phenomenal job in making Bret Hart look like $1,000,000, bleeding for him, which is rare that you would see in the '90s, in this era of the '90s. Um, the submission technical wrestling was on point. The best part was the finish where Roddy Piper puts him in a chokehold. Bret Hart jumps to the ropes, flips him, 1, 2, 3, roll up victory, and Bret the Hitman Hart gets the victory. They shake hands and then they put the belt on him. Bret Hart earning Roddy Piper's respect. A phenomenal match. Like I said, my match of the night personally. So then we move on to an 8-man tag team match featuring Sergeant Slaughter, Virgil, Big Bossman, and Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus the Nasty Boys, the Mountie, and the Repo Man. And man, they had some horrible heels back then. The Repo Man, the Mountie, the Nasty Boys were good. I like those guys. But and then Sergeant Slaughter last year was a heel in the main event of WrestleMania. Now this year he's in a random 8-man tag team match. Granted, one of the advantages of a double main event is that they were willing to give those matches time and then move these other guys to the side. But at the same time, they still didn't know how to process it because they would just put them all together in this, and this was what I thought it would be, just the baby faces, the top baby faces of the company, at least in the mid card division, getting the upper hand against these heels. And thank goodness, because there's no way that the Repo Man and the Mountie deserve a victory against these competitors. And then we get to what should have been the main event of the show, the Macho Man Randy Savage beating Ric Flair. Now, like I've mentioned countless times, it could have been Hogan and Flair. It probably was going to be that, but so many stories, whether it was a steroid trial, whether it wasn't selling tickets, we ended up getting this match. And even though this wasn't the match of the night for me, this was far better than what Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan would have been match-wise. Maybe the aspect and the spectacle of it, yeah, it would have been a good watch, but this was pure wrestling gold. Ric Flair, one of the greatest of all time. Randy Savage, one of the greatest of all time. And this was a testament of how good managers were back then. Ms. Elizabeth played a big part in this, with Ric Flair playing mind games on the Macho Man, trying to take away his woman, kissing her, like mocking him, and then Macho Man being infuriated and beating the crap out of him. Mr. Perfect getting in the way of Macho Man. Kind of crazy that I know Mr. Perfect was injured at this point, but he was a solid manager. He really was a good manager. Like, if you didn't know he was a good wrestler, then Mr. Perfect could have been a solid manager. Granted, thankfully, he ended up going back to the ring and still giving us classic matches. Anyways, Macho Man gets the victory. He gets the WWF Championship back. This is his second reign, I believe. Yeah, and then he holds it on to until SummerSlam. Or roughly a little bit after that. I don't remember how long he held it, but it was good that he had one more run in him, and I was very happy for the Macho Man. And Ric Flair, one of the greatest of all time. He was a phenomenal heel. A lot of people love and respect him nowadays, that it's hard to boo him. So, despite his questionable things that he's done in the past, but he is a very entertaining person. Side rant: how has Ric Flair never been in the main event of WrestleMania? Double main event? No, 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 no. Well, main events is what goes on last, and Ric Flair is one of those guys that it shocks me that he's never been in the main event of WrestleMania. If anyone deserved it more than anyone, it's definitely Ric Flair. Woo! And after Randy Savage beat Ric Flair, you can honestly just turn the TV off, because this is awful up to this point. There's nothing worth watching after all of this. The next match is Tatanka versus Rick Martel. Obviously, this is the bathroom break match, just a way to get Tatanka over. Rick Martel, at this point, they kind of dropped the ball with him, so Tatanka at this point was on an undefeated streak, or he was going into an undefeated streak. So I guess there's that, and I enjoyed it this for what it was. But um, moving on, we gotta talk about this one. Money Inc. versus the Natural Disasters. Now, the Natural Disasters and Money Inc. both heel teams. Why is this happening? And if to top it off, it ends in the counter. I would have had, if they were gonna do an 8-man tag, I would have done IRS, Ted DiBiase, and the Nasty Boys versus Bossman, Virgil Slaughter, and Duggan. That's what I would have done. And then as far as the Natural Disasters, they could have taken on LOD, if I'm being honest, because how is it that LOD is there on the show doing an interview in their ring gear and yet they don't wrestle unless one of them was injured and I don't know about, but man, they deserve to be on the card. They were a big sell. Obviously, they one of them, I believe it was Hawk, who was having drug problems. Maybe they didn't want to push him too hard, but then again, money is money, and LOD had lots of it when you put him on the show. This was a disaster, pun intended. The Natural Disasters are just not a good tag team. They were not meant to be taken serious, and it was just embarrassing for a guy who once headlined WrestleMania, that being Ted DiBiase. Owen Hart defeated Skinner in under a minute. This was pointless. Moving on. The main event, if you dare to call it that. Hulk Hogan versus Sid Justice. Now, it's funny to me that Sid Justice has only ever competed in 2 WrestleManias in his entire career. And both those matches were the main event of WrestleMania. And there is a reason why Sid was never successful as far as WWF goes. Because he is just awful. He is not a good wrestler. He is a good monster-like character, but he is just not a good wrestler. I'm sorry. And this match proved that the match even starts. Yeah, the match even starts terrible. Sid Justice comes in the ring. Hulk Hogan makes his entrance. Sid Justice beats him up, and then Hogan gets the upper hand. And keep in mind, Real American is still playing. And then finally, the match actually starts without music, and then they just fight off, and it's just botched after botch after botch. And then and then I read about this, but the finish was they had to pivot because all these pivots they show pivot. What is this, Friends? Um, Man, the ending they messed up. They messed up the finish. Hulk Hogan hits the leg drop. It was 1-2, and it was a fair 3 count. But then Harvey Whippleman gets in the ring because Papa Shango misses cue. The bell rings, and then Hulk Hogan wins by disqualification, even though Harvey Whippleman didn't touch him or anything. They fight it off. Papa Shango gets the up, comes in, and then the Ultimate Warrior comes back, which was possibly the Ultimate Warrior's biggest mistake ever, to come back after how they treated him. I mean, he wasn't perfect, the Ultimate Warrior, but yeah, he didn't deserve he didn't deserve the way he left, and then most importantly, WWF didn't deserve the Ultimate Warrior to come back, and there was rumors that it was a different guy, but still, nonetheless, this was just horrible. It was just a way to have a reason why Hulk Hogan was still in the main event, just so we can have Warrior have his moment. This was just stupid. Pathetic, and it really dragged the show down. Like I said, the first half of the show was an A show, top to bottom, and then the second half was just awful booking and just terrible. Like, if I'm being honest, the last 4 matches were a combined 20 minutes. That could be one main event on its own. So I just didn't get it. If I could rate the show, I would give the first half an A, if I'm being honest, and then the second half I would give it like an F. Yeah, an F is more reasonable. But regardless, we do have to combine both of them, and I would have to give this show I'm gonna give it a B minus, and I am kind of dreading giving it that rating because that second half really didn't deserve it. And but yeah, I'll give it a B minus. It was still better than a lot of the most recent one. It really is saved by Piper and Hart and Savage Flair, two awesome matches. But other than that, just wasn't too happy with it. Anyways, that's it for my review of WrestleMania 8. We move on to arguably the worst WrestleMania of all time, if you can call it that, WrestleMania 9. But wish me luck. Take care, everyone.